My name is Emily, and my story begins in a small town in the countryside, where my family always struggled to survive. My father, John, was a simple and humble man who worked as a janitor at the school where I studied. He did everything he could to support us, but our budget was always tight. My mother, Margaret, worked as a seamstress at home, but her earnings were not enough to cover all the expenses. School was a difficult environment for me. From an early age, I realized that our financial conditions set us apart from others. While my classmates wore new clothes and modern backpacks, I was content with second-hand clothes and an old, worn-out backpack. Despite all the difficulties, I tried to excel in my studies and be a good student, but I faced many humiliations, especially from a classmate named Jessica. Jessica was the typical popular girl in school. She had notable beauty and a charm that attracted everyone's admiration. Her parents were well known in town for their wealth and social status. Her father was a successful businessman, owning several local companies, while her mother was an active socialite, always involved in charity events and high society meetings. Jessica lived in a huge, beautiful, and luxurious house, nothing compared to what I had. Every time I passed by, I felt a mix of admiration and envy. While I returned to my modest wooden house, Jessica enjoyed a home with spacious rooms, a pool, and a well-kept garden. Even though she had an apparently perfect and wonderful life, Jessica was a cruel girl who constantly felt the need to assert her superiority. I tried to understand why someone who had everything could have such a hardened heart. Belittling others made her feel powerful and important. It was in this setting that, in the 4th grade, I began to experience the cruelty of children. My biggest nightmare was physical education class when all the students had to wear the school uniform. While others had clean and new uniforms, mine was faded and had small patches. Jessica was impeccably dressed as always and seemed to have everything she wanted. She loved to put me down in front of others. "Look at Emily," she would exclaim, laughing loudly. "It looks like she got those clothes from the trash." I would just lower my head, trying to ignore the laughter around me. But the shame and pain were inevitable. One of the hardest days was the annual school picnic. All the students brought baskets full of delicious food and held competitions for who had the best picnic basket. I knew I couldn't compete, but I tried to hide my insecurity. When the day arrived, I went to school with a simple basket, with sandwiches my mother had made with the little we had at home. When we got to the park, Jessica immediately noticed my basket. "Emily, did you bring poor people food to the picnic?" she asked, with a malicious smile. "I don't think anyone will want to eat that." The other students laughed, and I felt tears forming in my eyes. I tried to walk away, but Jessica wouldn't leave me alone. "Emily, you're so pathetic," she continued. "You shouldn't have even come." When I thought nothing could be worse than being the laughingstock of the class, things got even more painful when my father was called to fix a problem at school during class hours. I knew he would be there, and I was terrified at the idea of Jessica and the others seeing my father in his dirty work clothes and tired expression. When he arrived, I was in the classroom, but I could hear the whispers and laughter of the children. I looked out the window and saw my father in his janitor uniform, cleaning and fixing what was needed. My heart broke. I loved my father, but the shame I felt was overwhelming. During recess, Jessica approached me with a malicious smile. "Hey, Emily, is it true that that dirty guy is your dad?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Yes," I replied, feeling my face burn with shame. "So that's why you're poor," she laughed. "Your dad is the janitor." How embarrassing. After school, my father tried to talk to me, but I pulled away, avoiding his gaze. He noticed my reaction, and although he didn't say anything, I saw the sadness in his eyes. That night was one of the hardest. I cried silently, feeling torn between the love for my father and the shame that I knew was unfair. Several similar episodes followed. Every time my father came to the school to fix something, I felt the same wave of shame and anxiety. He noticed my reaction, and in silent moments at home, I saw him watching me with concern. One day, he entered my room while I was pretending to study. He sat beside me and, with a gentle voice, began to speak. "Emily, I know you're going through a tough time," he said. "And I know that sometimes it can be embarrassing to have a father like me. But I want you to know that everything I do is for you and your mother. The job I have may not be glamorous, but it's honest. And I'm proud of that." I looked at him as tears streamed down my face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I love you, but sometimes it's so hard." He hugged me, and at that moment, I began to understand the depth of his sacrifice and his love for us. The turning point came with the approach of Father's Day at school. All the students were excited, preparing to bring their fathers and introduce them to the class. I was hesitant, but after reflecting on everything my father had done for me, I made a decision. On the day of the event, I put on my best clothes and went to my father, who was getting ready to go to work. "Dad," I said, holding his hand, "I want you to come to school with me today. I want you to meet my classmates and for them to meet you." He looked at me, surprised and moved. "Are you sure, Emily?" "Yes, Dad." When we arrived at school, I felt everyone's eyes on us, but this time I didn't care. I walked up on stage with my father by my side and, with a firm voice, began to speak. "This is my father, John. He is the hardest working and most honest man I know. He may not have a glamorous job, but everything he does out of love for our family. I am very proud of him, and I want everyone to know that he has taught me the most important values in life: honesty, courage, and love." The room was silent for a moment before bursting into applause. I looked at my father, saw the simplicity in his face and the tears in his eyes. I knew that I had finally recognized and honored the incredible man he was. As my father and I received applause, I noticed that Jessica was sitting alone, with a distant and sad look. She hadn't brought anyone to the event. After the ceremony, I decided to talk to her. "Jessica," I called softly, approaching. "Where's your dad?" She avoided my gaze and, in a low voice, replied, "He couldn't come. He's always busy with work." It was the first time I saw Jessica vulnerable. At that moment, I understood that all her bitterness and cruelty were the result of a lonely childhood lacking in love. I remembered my father's words, that everyone offers what they have best. Jessica, unfortunately, hadn't received much love, and therefore didn't know how to offer it. I took a deep breath and made a decision. "Would you like to come to dinner at my house tonight, Jessica? I'd like you to meet my family." She looked at me surprised, not knowing what to say. "Why? After everything I did to you?" "Because I understood that you only did it because you were hurting," I replied. "And we all deserve a chance to change." Jessica accepted my invitation, and that night, she sat at our table. My father, with his simple and welcoming manner, treated her like a daughter. We talked, laughed, and for the first time, I saw a genuine smile on Jessica's face. While my mother served dessert, Jessica looked around the table, amazed by the warm and loving atmosphere of our home. After dinner, we stayed in the backyard talking. Jessica began to open up and told me about her loneliness, about how she felt abandoned by her parents. After hearing her, everything started to make sense. I understood that she took out this frustration on others, trying to hide her pain. "My parents are always busy," she said, with a downcast look. "They give me everything I want, but they can never spend time with me." My father, with his simple wisdom, replied, "Jessica, it's never too late to change. Love and kindness are always within our reach, if we want them." Even if Jessica didn't fully understand what that meant, something inside her was about to change. She would understand it later. From that day on, she began to see the world with different eyes. Our conversations became more frequent, and she started spending more time at my house. Gradually, she began to realize that her worth wasn't in the material things she possessed, but in the genuine connections she made. At school, Jessica became kinder and more understanding towards others. Instead of making cruel comments, she started to praise her classmates' skills and talents. I remember a specific day, during an art class, when a shy student named Michael was nervous about showing his drawing. Jessica, who would have previously made a cruel joke, said, "Michael, your drawing is amazing. You have a lot of talent." The room was silent for a moment before everyone started clapping. Michael smiled timidly and thanked her. This small act of kindness from Jessica marked the beginning of her transformation. Jessica's change wasn't limited to school. Over time, she began to try to improve her relationship with her own parents. One night, she called me, apprehensive, saying that she wanted to talk to them about how she felt. "Emily, I'm afraid it will be in vain," she confessed. "I don't think they'll understand." "Be honest with them, Jessica. Say what's in your heart. They need to know how you feel," I encouraged her. That night, Jessica had a frank conversation with her parents. She told them about her loneliness and how their absence hurt her. They, surprised and moved, listened attentively. They realized that, although they had provided everything materially, they had failed to be emotionally present for their daughter. In the following days, Jessica's parents started to make some changes. Her father tried to adjust his schedule to spend more time with the family. Her mother, who was always involved in social events, began to prioritize family dinners and quality moments with Jessica. They began to prioritize simple moments, like watching a movie together or taking a walk in the park. Gradually, the family started reconnecting, and Jessica felt the love and support she had always desired but never believed she could have. The years passed, we entered adolescence, and my friendship with Jessica continued to grow. I saw her become a kinder and more understanding person. She still had her moments of difficulty, but I was there to support her. Our friendship taught me a lot about empathy and forgiveness as well. At school, Jessica and I formed an unbeatable duo. We became leaders in school projects and extracurricular activities, always encouraging and supporting our classmates. We learned to value everyone for their unique qualities and to offer our best, regardless of the circumstances. When it came time to graduate from high school, I felt a mix of excitement and melancholy. We were about to go our separate ways, but our friendship remained strong. Jessica decided to pursue a career in psychology, inspired by the changes she experienced in her own life and wanting to help others overcome their difficulties. I, on the other hand, chose education, with the desire to be a teacher who inspired her students in the same way my father had inspired me. At graduation, I looked around and saw my father, always present, with tears of pride in his eyes. Jessica's parents were also there, smiling and applauding her. It was an emotional moment, and I realized how much we had grown and changed. The years went by, and Jessica and I pursued our careers with passion and dedication. We kept in touch, always supporting each other. Jessica, now a respected psychologist, worked with children and adolescents, helping them overcome traumas and find their inner worth. Her personal experience with loneliness and reconciliation with her parents made her an empathetic and effective professional. I became a teacher at our old school, dedicated to creating a welcoming and inclusive environment for my students. My classroom was a place where every child felt valued and supported. I often shared the story of my father and Jessica to inspire my students to value kindness and honesty. One day, the school decided to organize a special event to celebrate former students who had made a difference in the community. I was invited to speak and asked Jessica to be my guest of honor. During the event, I looked at the auditorium full of familiar and new faces. I stepped onto the stage with Jessica by my side and, with a firm voice, began to tell our story. Many years ago, at this school, two girls met under difficult circumstances. One of them was ashamed of her humble background, while the other hid her loneliness behind a mask of cruelty. Today, we are here to share how friendship, understanding, and support can transform lives. Jessica took the microphone and continued, "I was that cruel girl. I took out my frustration and pain on others because I didn't know how to deal with my own feelings. But thanks to Emily and her family, I learned to value love and presence. Today, I help other children find their way, just as I found mine." Applause erupted in the auditorium, and tears of emotion shone in many eyes. I looked at my father, sitting in the front row, his smile lit up with pride. That moment was the culmination of years of growth, learning, and love. After the event, Jessica and I walked through the schoolyard, reminiscing about our childhood days and reflecting on how much we had changed. "You know, Emily," said Jessica, "your father taught me something very important. Everyone offers what they have best. And you all gave me love and understanding when I needed it most. I don't even know what I would have become if I hadn't had dinner at your house. That night changed the course of my life. You taught me so much." I smiled and hugged her. "And you showed us that everyone deserves a second chance and that, with love and support, we can all change for the better." As the event went on, my father, John, was invited to take the stage. He was visibly moved, and with his humble and simple demeanor, he began to speak. "I have always believed that kindness and hard work are the foundations of a well-lived life. It may not seem like much, but what I did for my family and this school was always with heart. And seeing my daughter, Emily, and her friend, Jessica, grow up and become the incredible women they are today makes me feel that all the sacrifice was worth it." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. He continued, "It's not just the great deeds that change the world, but the small daily acts of kindness and compassion. Seeing how these girls, now women, have passed on these values makes me believe that an entire generation can be transformed by the simple act of caring and loving others." My father then looked at me and Jessica, his eyes shining with pride and tears. "If my actions and my example could contribute to this, then I consider my life successful." Applause echoed through the auditorium, and at that moment, it became clear that my father's impact had extended beyond our family. He had planted seeds of kindness and integrity that were now flourishing in so many lives, inspiring an entire generation to value what truly matters. My father's influence continued to spread. His words at that event resonated in the hearts of everyone present. Students, parents, and teachers began to value more the small acts of kindness in their daily lives. The school started programs to encourage empathy and mutual support among students, inspired by my father's story. Jessica, in her practice as a psychologist, often shared John's story with her patients, showing how humility and love can overcome any adversity. Many children and teenagers who attended her sessions began to change their attitudes, seeking to be more understanding and supportive of others. As for me, as a teacher, I incorporated my father's values into my classroom. Every lesson, every interaction with my students, was an opportunity to pass on the legacy of honesty, hard work, and compassion that he had taught me. My father became a figure of inspiration for the entire school community, a symbol that true greatness comes from the heart. Today, when I look back, I see the journey of two girls who, despite the humiliations and challenges, found their inner strength and learned to value what truly matters in life. Jessica's transformation and reconciliation with her parents, my own journey from shame to pride, and the lasting impact of my father's actions are testimonies to the power of kindness and compassion. My father's story, John, is now told in our town as an example of how an ordinary person can make an extraordinary change. His legacy lives on in every act of kindness, in every gesture of support, and in every heart he touched with his humility and love. He taught us that, regardless of our position or circumstance, we all have the power to make a difference in the world around us. And so, we continue to walk, inspired by his example, always seeking to offer the best of ourselves, knowing that every small act of love and compassion can transform a life, a community, and even an entire generation. So, what did you think of this story? We hope you enjoyed it. I ask you to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of our stories.